Hi, everyone. Let me start this from the beginning. Okay, this week I want to talk about two different things. What you'll be doing for the final portfolio, and I want to talk overall about revision. Basically, what you'll be doing for the final portfolio is revising, so they work together. So the final portfolio is the final thing you'll submit in this class. And the next few slides will give you an overview of what that will entail, what should be included, and when it is due. There's also an assignment sheet about the final portfolio in this week's folder, and you may want to look at it either before this or while you're watching the video, or at least know where to find it, but it is in this week's folder. Okay, so the final portfolio, again, is the final thing you'll submit for the course. It's a collection of work you've done through the semester that you will be revising over the next 2 weeks in a single file. And it allows you to kind of show off your accomplishments and your growth. Show what you can do now that you couldn't do when you wrote that first fiction draft many weeks ago, or what you were unable to do at the beginning of the semester. And it's a reason for celebration. Sometimes it feels like, especially in a semester like this, where we've got COVID going on and everything else, it feels like it's just been rough for a lot of us. However, you've all done some really amazing work during our time together. And sometimes by looking at it all together in one file in one place, you can really feel proud of everything you've done. And it's a reason for celebration. And I'm going to be celebrating right along with you. Okay, so what you'll do, the first thing you'll do is you'll write a cover letter. And that's basically a letter. It's a letter to me, but really it's a way for you to reflect on everything that you've done, what you've accomplished in this portfolio, what feedback was useful, what feedback was not useful, how you decided what to change in each piece and why. It's a way for you to kind of get to know yourself as a writer too, to really think these are the decisions I've made, and I get to kind of take ownership of those, not even kind of, I get to really take ownership of the decisions I've made when it comes to what to revise and what not to revise. And you'll also look at, do you feel like you've grown as a writer, and how are you writing differently now than maybe you were before? Then you'll revise that short story or short fiction excerpt you did at the beginning of the semester. You'll have your revised creative nonfiction and your revised poetry, all of those that you submitted as drafts. And then you have the option of submitting extra pieces. You don't have to, but if you want me to give you some feedback on those additional pieces, maybe you started a second short story and the draft wasn't finished in time for you to turn in, but you'd kind of like someone else's eyes on it, anything like that. You can submit at least up to one additional piece per genre, but you don't have to. And I'm not going to, the points I award won't change based on whether or not you submit extra. It's just kind of an extra opportunity. It'll be due before the final, so basically midnight, Friday, May 7th, everything is due. You'll submit it as a single Word document or PDF. And there are ways to combine documents. And if you need help doing that, I'd be glad to help you. And it's worth a total of 600 points. And I'll explain that breakdown, where that breakdown is explained on the assignment sheet. Also, it's a major paper, so it's something that has to be done and submitted in order to pass the course. So you may think, well, I've already done all this writing, I've gotten feedback. Why do I have to revise it? Sometimes you write a first draft and you fall in love with it. And I've done that. And sometimes you don't have to change a lot. You can get lucky. Sometimes you write a draft and you think it's great, and then you realize, maybe it's not when you go back and look at it. So let's talk about what revision is and why it's important. So Dave Hood, from the writing process, revising your creative writing. I've linked to that in the PowerPoint to this page. Dave Hood basically, he writes a blog It has a really good website on writing tips. So I highly recommend you checking out the site, which is why I linked it. But he says that revision is the most creative aspect of writing, especially if you take a break in between the first draft and the revision, which is why for this course, I didn't have you do a revision with each draft every time, which I do in my composition classes. Because with creative writing, it really helps to have a break. And even with poetry, you at least will have a week or so of a break. So maybe not as much. But when you return to it, you see it with fresh eyes. I like how he quotes Brenda Miller, says that first draft is a discovery draft. Basically, a first draft is almost never your best work. I know some writers who know what it's going to be like before they put it on the page, but they're very rare, and they make me a little jealous. But basically, the goal of the draft is to kind of play with it, try out new things, be willing to experiment, and see the feedback. See what response you get from your peers, from me, maybe from others who you let look at your work, either way or any way. But it's basically a way to try it out. You can restructure, you can play with new things in the revision, because maybe there were things you were afraid to try in the draft, or things you wish you tried in the draft that you didn't. Also, by this point in the semester, we've learned new skills. We started with fiction, but the skills we learned for fiction, we talked about how they fed creative nonfiction, and then creative nonfiction fed poetry. But it goes in reverse too. Everything we learn from poetry can help make your fiction and your CNF stronger. So you want to be able to kind of go back. And if you've learned something in poetry when it comes to language, you may want to go back and apply it to that fiction draft. Maybe you learned something in CNF that you wish you'd known for fiction, anything like that. But the more you practice, and I really wanted to build this classroom giving lots of practice with those small weekly workshops, it leads to new ideas and it strengthens the skills you already have. So you may know something now that you didn't know at the beginning of the semester. And this gives you a chance to really make all of your writing as strong as it can be. Next week, we're going to talk a little bit about submission and publication. So this is a good chance or a good opportunity to kind of start polishing your pieces with that in mind. It's also one of the ways that I think about revision is what a mentor of mine told me, that when you revise, it's not just, it's a revision. You're re-envisioning the piece. It's not just small edits and changing some spelling here and there, but it's a way of looking at something with new eyes. We may think that things are there, but they're not, because they were there in our head and we meant to write them down, but maybe we didn't. Maybe we think something is clear because we know what it should be in our minds, but for a reader, it may not be clear. So it gives you a chance to kind of look at those things and see what works and what doesn't work. And what can I do better? And also it's a way to apply feedback, but also taking ownership. Consider the feedback you get from your peers in those workshops, and consider the feedback you get from me. But also take some ownership. Just because I suggest something doesn't mean that you have to do it. You want to think about your writing, it's yours. Take ownership of it. Be willing to defend it, but also be willing to consider what others say too. Don't just like dismiss things out of hand. I had a piece that I submitted. It was published in a literary magazine. It's a personal essay. And it was about my experiences with CPTSD and recovering from domestic violence, comparing it to a storyline in season 13 of Supernatural. And the editor at first said, well, this section that you have here, that's in like a second person point of view and voice, it doesn't seem to match. And I was like, well, those are therapy notes. And it was really important for me to have those. And then I realized that I didn't need to get rid of it. I needed to do it more consistently. So instead of just taking her advice and saying, I'm not doing it at all, I submitted it again with her notes and said, hey, so I'm considering it this way. And it was published. So I was really lucky there. But also, I've gotten feedback where I'm like, I don't think that's the type of writing I do. I was in a workshop, my last workshop in grad school, with a mentor who was a journalist, and he was a very linear thinker. and liked everything chronologically and kind of spelled out. And in workshop, he would say to many of us who were doing different types of structures that we should try that, and it was hard to follow. But for me, my brain doesn't work in a linear fashion. And I've said this before, and if you had me in a face-to-face class, you know this. I am very open about having ADHD. My brain makes connections all over the place, and my writing reflects that. So I knew that while some of his feedback was good, when he had suggestions about like language and scenery and description, like those were really helpful. But when it came to structure, I knew that he wasn't the person to do it. Also, though, there are times that you'll get feedback that will say something and you'll say, oh, that's so great. So I was trying an epistolary short story when I was in a fiction workshop at undergrad. And the epistolary story is like a letter. This was like a collection of journal entries. And it was from the point of view of someone who was like trying to escape an abusive relationship. And in my first draft, I was talking about how I was writing it basically to the abusive partner, and was talking about like how, like from an I point of view, not me as a person, but me as I as the character, was struggling and missing, like the character was missing her mom, all of these things. And the feedback I was getting was, well, wouldn't the abuser know this? Wouldn't the abuser know this? I was like, yeah, but I don't know how to make it work. And another student in the workshop said, well, why don't you change it and write it to the mom? And I was like, oh, that makes it work. So sometimes you'll get something from your peers that I may not pick up on. And the instructor hadn't picked up on that idea yet. He was like, oh, that's so obvious. But it took someone else. So don't discount things just because they're on your level. Don't discount things because you think you're a stronger writer than them, because that doesn't mean they can't see things differently. We're all at different points in our journey. And don't assume that because I say something, you have to do it. That's what that cover letter is for in the portfolio. You get to tell me why and why not. And it's fine. I'm not going to be offended. I'm going to be more excited and impressed that you're taking ownership of your own pieces. That's what I want the most from you. So revising happens on two different levels. The first is macro editing or macro revising. It's looking at the overall piece. So in prose, you're looking at the plot structure. Does it have a climax? Does it have a rising action, or does it have a resolution? Look at the beginning, middle, and end. Does the story feel resolved? Or the essay, do they feel resolved at the end? Do they begin in a good place, or could they begin somewhere else? Does your narrator and do your characters feel consistent? Also, is setting fleshed out? Is description strong? Are there places that you could change that? Does dialogue feel natural, or would it? You're looking at the piece as a whole. It's like big overall looking. With poetry, you're looking at syntax. Does this mean what I want it to mean? Does the language convey what I want it to convey? Does it have a good rhythm and feel to it? Or does it feel kind of staccato and wooden, and does that need to be changed? Are line breaks in good areas? Or am I using enjambment appropriately? Or could I switch up where I break my lines? This is always a weakness for me when I write poetry, is I'm never quite sure if my line breaks are great until I hear from other people. So sometimes I'll hear, oh, this was great. And sometimes I'll say, well, why don't you try breaking it? I'll have someone say, well, what if you tried editing your lines here? I'm like, oh, so much better. So those are some things to keep in mind. You're basically just looking at the overall piece. Is it consistent? Does it create the impression that I want it to convey? Is the overall story or poem or essay expressing what I wanted to express? And is it doing so in a manner that is consistent, impactful, and effective? You're not looking at grammar yet. You're not looking at like punctuation yet. You're just looking at the overall piece. Are there plot holes that need to be filled in? Are there things that are unclear that I can clarify? And once you have that done, then you're ready to look at it again. This is micro editing. And if you're like me, I can sometimes do macro editing on the screen, but with micro editing, I need to look at it on a physical page. So I'll print it out, or I'll write it by hand as I'm looking at the computer. Either way, it's like I need to kind of see it physically before I know But other people are really good at editing on the screen. I know another writer, a friend of mine who's really good at editing on the screen, and I'm very impressed because that's not me, but more power to her. But basically, you do this after you macro edit. There's no point in looking at small things. These are mechanical things. You may think of this as proofreading. There's no point in proofreading a piece until you look at the macro stuff, because you may fix the punctuation in a sentence that winds up not being in the story or essay, or you may change a comma and in a draft that may not actually fit in the actual revised poem you're doing. So I do this second. Look for spelling errors, and especially homonym errors, those words that sound the same but mean different things. Make sure that the word choice is effective. Look at denotation, of course, the dictionary definition, but also pay attention to the connotation of that word. Is it getting the emotional meaning across that you need it to? Is punctuation appropriate? Am I using commas in the right places? Are my sentences complete? And if they're not complete, is that for impact, or is it because of an error on my behalf? Do I have a variety of sentence structures? And are my sentences constructed in such a way to reveal the most meaning they can? And then have I shown, or am I just telling the story? Can my reader experience a story along with me, or do they just feel like they're being told the story, which is what you want to avoid. For this, you may need someone else to look at it. There's always the option of using the Learning Commons, virtual tutoring, anything like that. Maybe you just have a friend that's another writer. Or maybe you all want to work together in the discussion board or through email, and you want some feedback that way. That's fine too. I would actually love it if you all work together somewhere. But yeah, so this will be the last thing you do with revising. But the biggest thing with revising is you want to keep in mind that this is your piece. And at the end of the day, your name is going to be on it, and you need to be proud of it. And that's what I want from each of you. That's all for today. Hope you have a wonderful week. Happy editing, happy revising, and happy writing.